Today, I have the privilege of welcoming Gene Sheridan to the C-suite spotlight. Gene is a very experienced semiconductor executive, one of the pioneering leaders in power electronics. After a successful career at IR, he went on to become CEO of the VC-backed startup BridgeCo. Then, in 2014, he co-founded Navitas Semiconductor with his colleague Dan Kinzer, and they set out to develop gallium nitride and silicon carbide power semiconductors for widespread commercial applications. They started with a humble beginning, operating out of a temporary trailer in Southern California, but then Navitas advanced GaN and silicon carbide devices started gaining traction in the market. And after about 7 years or so of focused effort, they went public in 2021 with over a $1 billion IPO. They hit another big milestone just last year, shipping over 100 million GaN devices. Gene's work in the industry has earned him a lot of awards, to say the least, including the title of one of the top 10 most influential people in power electronics. And for their many achievements, Navitas has been recognized by Forbes as one of America's top 50 most successful small companies. Gene, it's an honor to be talking with you, and I know we're all eager to learn more about the company and your views, specifically on power technology and where it's heading. So without further ado, welcome.
Thank you, Jason. Great to be here and great to chat with you. Thanks for the nice intro.
So I usually like to start with a question that raises some personal, very interesting personal stories. So, I mean, you earned your bachelor's degree in EE, but what originally interested you in engineering?
I think back in the 80s when I was going through high school and debating where to go and what to do, I was always had that strong math and sciences background and analytical mind. I'm a problem solver at heart. And so that there was a big push in engineering, not specifically semiconductors, but that was a natural path. If you have a curious mind, if you're constantly wondering how things work and how you can fix them, break them and fix them, engineering's a natural path. But it took me a little while to realize how I could combine engineering and that analytical side with more the entrepreneurial commercial side. And that kind of developed in the early part of my career where I sort of realized putting those two things together is even more exciting and more fun for me.
Great. No, that's great. And for those who have been living under a rock and haven't heard of Navitas Semiconductor, will you give the audience just a brief overview of the company and what you really focus on there?
Yeah, actually, this has been a long time in the making. Dan Kinzer and I worked at International Rectifier. I was actually up to 17 years. He was up to 27 years. We had created 3 different businesses together there. Always Dan as the technical leader, me as the commercial or business leader. So we've got this long-standing partnership. And way back in 2000, we believed gallium nitride was the next big thing in power semiconductors. And these sort of new materials, new dramatic advances don't come around that often. The last time was back in the 60s and 70s, where silicon power MOSFETs ultimately displaced bipolar transistors by switching faster and more efficiently. Gallium nitride and silicon carbide are the same type of thing. They can now switch even faster and even more efficiently than traditional silicon devices. So back in 2000, Dan and I actually started the gallium nitride program at International Rectifier. So these things are decades in the making. We saw it coming. We knew it was early. We knew it was exciting, but you could spend a decade or 2 in advanced research, R&D, reliability, production. A lot of basic things need to be worked out. Well, fast forward to 2013, we were both at a point in our career that we're ready for the next big thing. We reconnected, Dan and I. We thought that gallium nitride had reached a maturity stage, that it had an opportunity for significant commercial adoption, but it hadn't been achieved. Even 15 years later, people were still in R&D mode on gallium nitride. So with that in mind, we thought our timing was right, the vision was right, the teamwork between Dan and I was right, and we started Navitas to focus on a next generation power semiconductor company.
Yeah, and it kind of bleeds into the next question I want to ask is, you talk about timing and vision, and it kind of starts with these trends that may happen, whether it's the 1960s or the early 2000s. From your standpoint, what are some of the macro tech trends you see affecting power delivery and power management today, and what applications is Navitas pursuing to drive its next wave of growth?
Well, at the biggest level, just like these disruptive new power semiconductor technologies may only come around every few decades, electrification of our planet has been brewing for a couple hundred years. Actually, much of what is modern day electrified today, even early electric cars, electric cooking, electric heating, electric light bulbs. All of these were actually invented in the Thomas Edison days of 1700s and early 1800s. But electrification kind of went dormant for a while, and we had only a small percentage of all of our energy applications. And even today, only 20% of our applications of doing real energy, real work that requires energy, are electrified. Most of them are gas and oil powered, fossil fuel powered, gas cooking, gas heating, gas cooling, for example, gas cars, of course. So electrification is now making a really big comeback. And it's our vision, and much of the planet's vision, is to reverse that 80-20, where instead of being 20% electrified and 80% fossil fuel powered planet, we have an opportunity to be 80% electrified. Electric cars obviously being one great example, but this is going to apply to, like I said, electric heating, cooling, cooking. Pretty much almost anything you do with requiring energy could be transformed in electrification. So we see that as one of the biggest opportunities and biggest trends to drive sustainability and a clean energy planet. And it's going to be fueled by advanced power chips like gallium nitride and silicon carbide.
Yeah, I know that's a great summary in terms of the chronology of how this has all kind of happened. It basically answered my next question. I was going to kind of ask you, what made you believe that these materials, GaN and SiC, can be that transformative? I mean, if there's anything you want to add, a little bit more granular on that, you can. But I mean, that did touch on that next question I was going to ask you.
Well, it gets a little bit more technical, but if you look at most power electronics, we're just taking raw forms of electricity and making them usable to modern electronics. So the raw form of electricity that you get today from coal-fired power plants or from the grid or however you're creating that electricity starts as high voltage AC power. High voltage AC power is not actually usable. It's just a way to efficiently and safely distribute that power through the grid around the world. But when you plug into the wall, that power's got to get converted. It's got to get converted and distributed as efficiently as possible. It's got to get converted into the opposite form, from high voltage AC or alternating current power to low voltage DC power. That's how almost all modern forms of electronics need low voltage DC power. So gallium nitride and silicon carbide convert that power, distribute that power, manage that power far more efficiently than silicon-based devices would. But it goes further than that. We can actually switch faster. And when you switch the power supply faster, you can deliver more power faster, like faster charging. But also when you switch faster, you can shrink the size of some of the energy storage components inside the power system, capacitors and inductors. It gets a little technical, but what it means is we can dramatically shrink the size, weight, even the cost of the power electronics while delivering that power faster and more efficiently to whatever it is we're trying to power, be it a battery, your car, your home, etc. So that gives you a little bit more color on what's exactly happening underneath the hood that's allowing gallium nitride and silicon carbide to be such a transformative technology to virtually all forms of power electronics as we electrify the whole planet.
That's great. And then obviously you're talking about, I'm sure, referencing solutions that you've helped your customers achieve, or they're starting to achieve, or getting some maturity to that achievement for their own solutions. And having been around for 10 years, I mean, from a customer standpoint, I mean, what is your favorite customer success story or deployment of your technology that has been like most impactful to you or your team so far?
Yeah, it's a great question. When we started, one of the exciting opportunities and challenges of power is it's everywhere. You need electricity. You got to convert that grid power, that high voltage AC power. Every application that's electrified or could become electrified needs these power chips. So it's a huge market. It's a 20, 30, $40 billion market over time. But where to focus? We're a small company. The number one reason any startup can beat the big guys is through focus. So when we first started, we debated for a year. We surveyed the market. Do we go after solar and renewable energy? Do we go after data centers, which were still important even in that day for challenging power requirements? Mobile, consumer, electric vehicle just starting out 10 years ago. We decided after all of that debate to focus on one area and only one area, gallium nitride, for fast charging of your mobile devices. And so we knew, for example, here's a 60-watt silicon-based Apple MacBook charger, commonly used today. 60 watts is enough power to power your phone, but also a full laptop or an iPad, anything like that. And as one of 280 examples that are now in production today, here's one of my favorites, which is an aftermarket company called Charge ASAP. And this is not 60 watts like this guy. This is gallium nitride 100 watts. So it's almost double the power, but also give you instead of giving you one output here just to charge one device, this gives you 3 outputs. So now you can fast charge with 100 watts. You could have a 60 watt laptop, a 20 watt iPad, and an 18 watt iPhone, all charging fast simultaneously. This is a perfect device for a road warrior like me who wants to carry one small, powerful thing, fast charges all your devices. So this is a fun thing. We can all relate to it. It's where we started. It's still a foundational business for us. It's got a lot of future potential, but now we're expanding into all new markets.
Oh, that's great, and appreciate the ASP example. It's very cool. I may have to jump on and purchase one of those.
Yeah, you just type in GaN chargers in Amazon or any website. They'll all pop up, dozens of them, if not hundreds of them.
Switching gears a little bit, Navitas, you've been around, pioneering company in gallium nitride, silicon carbide, as we know, and you've been around long enough to have figured out some of the things about developing and selling these devices through trial and error. Tell the audience about one of your early mistakes and what you learned from that.
Well, I think you got to constantly be focused on the system level value prop. It's not very often, as they said, that such disruptive and exciting new technology like gallium nitride and silicon carbide come along. So when they do, in a pretty conservative space of power electronics, they get a lot of attention from the engineer. So everybody wants to try them. And so you could spend a lot of time chasing a lot of research projects. Every customer, it's a big market, lots of big size customers, lots of small ones. Everybody wants to try this stuff out. So we learned early on that if you chase every single guy that wants to kick the tires and evaluate gallium nitride and silicon carbide, you could spend a lot of time hoping for big business or spending a lot of time supporting the engineering efforts of that experiment and that investigation. And it's hard to figure out what's really going to go to production. We have to pay the bills. We have to ramp up. So for us, really being squarely focused on the system value prop. And while the technology I'm describing is disruptive and exciting, it's not easy to implement. And you can spend a lot of time with technical challenges. You have to redesign the entire power supply. Everything's changing. Controllers, thermal management, EMI, filtering, drive, control, isolation, a lot of things changing, a lot of things are new. So we learned early on that we've got to stop sort of chasing a million different little applications and experiments and focus in and actually bring the system level expertise, not just the device, but those things I mentioned, control, EMI, thermal management. So we have more application engineers than we do designers to help teach ourselves how to go from a chip to an exciting new power electronic system and to partner with our customers in creating that. And so we did that very successfully in mobile GaN chargers, as I described. Now we're looking to repeat that, not only with gallium nitride, but silicon carbide. So we're carefully trying to figure out where to double down and which applications are the really big winners, the really big drivers of this electrification trend, and the ones where Navitas can be a clear leader going forward.
Gotcha. I mean, that whole topic of adoption kind of had you working backwards a little bit from apps to design, and it makes sense. And kind of the next question, it's an unfair question to fit into a time slot because it is a little bit loaded. And I know you've answered, versions of this question throughout the last couple of years, but, with the debate between whether silicon is going to continue to be the leading semiconductor material and the merits of both silicon carbide and GaN, and obviously have been very well documented. Why do you think we haven't seen wider adoption of the materials yet? And I mean, what challenges do you think the industry needs to really overcome to allow this adoption to happen? You mentioned a metric 10% for your company in terms of the TAM, but bigger picture for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Number one, power is a very conservative industry, and for good reason. If the power supply or the power chips fail, the whole system is going down. And you don't want to have redundancy of every single power system. If one goes down, you've got a backup and a backup and a backup. So a lot of testing, a lot of very important testing on lifetime testing, robustness, reliability. We do incredible amounts of testing, billions of device hours of testing in our labs before we even bring the technology to the customer. So then they do a lot of testing. Even with that testing, who wants to go first? Who wants to be the first to jump in? It's not easy. In mobile chargers, we didn't go right to Apple and Samsung and expect the biggest guys to go first. They don't. You've got to start with the tier 2, the tier 3, the aftermarket players. They're smaller, they're quicker, they want to take chances, they want to take risks, and they will drive that innovation to be first. And once you get the guy who goes first, you get the guy who goes second. And they don't usually go first redesigning their entire lineup. They'll start with one program, maybe a premium product. So managing risk, especially around reliability and robustness, is very important. De-risking that for ourselves, de-risking it for our customers. The second thing is you got to start at the beginning. You can't just drop this in at the end of the development cycle like it's going to magically turn the power supply to be more efficient, miniaturize it. You have to start from the beginning. That's the whole development cycle. In mobile chargers, it's fast, which is one of the reasons we picked that market. 6 to 12 months, you could be in production. But that's 6 to 12 months for the first customer, for the first product. Then you got to get that domino effect that starts to occur. The domino effect we saw occur in mobile chargers over the last 4 years, where it starts to go from 1% adoption to 2 to 5 to 10, and it accelerates. Repeating that in other markets, they take longer. A solar inverter, a data center might take 2 years, 3 years to develop, 18 to 36 months. Electric vehicle power electronics are typically 3 years, used to be 4 or 5, and it's speeding up. So you've got to think about the development cycles. You got to think and embrace the conservative nature, the reliability focus of this industry. All of that has to be factored into our thinking about which markets we go after and how we can realistically drive mainstream commercial adoption in each of these segments, sort of one by one.
Thanks for going through that. You mentioned risk, technical risk. There's all different types of risk. There's technical risk. Your customers obviously will take a business risk and a technical risk at the same time. Shifting gears to a different kind of risk for you a while back, building a startup, especially a semiconductor startup. It's not for the faint of heart. What challenges do you remember that kept you up at night in the early days when you and Dan founded Navitas?
Every phase is different. So I think you have to be very adaptable and very obsessed with whatever that risk, those main risks are of each phase. The first risk is just funding. How do you get this idea paid for? And where's that money going to come from? If it's your own money, other people's money, family and friends, VCs, etc. Then there's the technical risk. Can I even get the technology to work? When we started Navitas, gallium nitride was in R&D mode with just a basic discrete transistor. Nobody wanted to put it into production. So we had to start with understanding what's holding this market back. And it's because a discrete transistor, just the transistor alone, was actually very hard to control, very hard to drive. And many people were trying to figure out with silicon drivers how we can solve that fundamental technical challenge. That led us to saying, we got to break this barrier. If we don't solve that problem, nobody's going to see mainstream GaN adoption. And we ultimately came up with a monolithic integration of the driver. If the silicon driver has to match the speed of gallium nitride, trying to do that in slower silicon is not a great plan. We invented how to integrate that drive and control right into the GaN chip monolithically itself, what we call now the first and only GaN integrated circuit, because it's integrating not just the basic transistor, which is difficult to drive and control, but integrates that drive and control to make it super simple to the customer. But that summary took us 18, 24 months of trial and error, fast cycles of learning, all trying to make sure you have the funding to get you there to a prototype that says, all right, I think we got something that could really change the market and drive some commercial mainstream adoption, which it ultimately did, 12 months after that.
Oh, great. I love the example, even, the trial and error on the, 18 to 24 months. It's incredible. You get some latitude with trial and error, especially in the R&D phase. That's basically what it is. You get a little bit less trial and error when it comes to talent. And so like shifting gears towards talent, you're based in Southern California region. Obviously, there's no shortage of bright minds on the West Coast where you have some reach, but there's also a lot of competition for top talent. As a quote unquote smaller company, what strategies has Navitas employed to attract the right people?
Yeah, and LA is not Silicon Valley. So even though you think West Coast and California got a lot of talent, there's not that many semiconductor companies here in Southern California. So we tapped into, of course, the pool of people I knew very well, International Rectifier, where Dan and I started. And much of our founding team and our management team and the early hiring was from International Rectifier. So it can be hard when you're in a place that actually doesn't have a deep talent bench. There's not that many semiconductor companies and even fewer in power semiconductors. So you got to convince people to move and reach out. So eventually we expanded to attracting people from all of the traditional power chip companies from around the world, and also built a global footprint. So we're not just attracting people to LA, but now we have about a dozen offices around the world. Ultimately, though, I think the attraction and the retention comes back to, it's mostly engineers, and engineers want to be fairly compensated, but especially want to advance their career by working on the most advanced things. So I think we have a strong value prop to engineering talent and to any talent is to come work on the most exciting leading edge gallium nitride and silicon carbide based power electronic systems across electrifying so many exciting applications for our planet. So it's a pretty exciting mission, and it's a pretty exciting field of the most advanced stuff in power electronics and power semiconductors. So I think all that works to keep our our ability to attract great talent strong, and our retention levels are super low, sub 5% on turnover. So that's gone well for us.
Great, yeah, and that actually ties into the other aspect of startups, which can be successful or unsuccessful, not only on technology but culture. And so, from a culture standpoint, which I know is important to you, what are two things about Navitas's culture that you're most proud of as the CEO that people maybe looking at the company would be surprised to learn?
Well, I'm a big fan of diversity, but not in the way everybody thinks of this word in a modern version. I don't mean diversity of color or religion or language, but diversity of thought, diversity of the way your brain thinks, diversity of your education and your experience. I think that actually makes culture more difficult, because getting people that think very differently is not easy, because they can be hard to relate to each other. Like in any relationship, it can be oil and water. A lot of people, Dan and I, and then Jason Zhang is the other key founder. Some people say, oh, you must finish each other's sentences. And I say, well, actually, not at all. We continue to think very differently than each other. And I'll think of something and think I have all the right answers. And then Dan's got a totally different view that makes me realize, okay, I didn't think of it holistically. I didn't think about that angle. And then Jason will have a totally different angle. And together, after iterating through that idea, that possibility, we'll sort of come up with a better solution. Now we've expanded. I hope that diversity that has to ultimately be founded on trust and respect, listening hard enough and having enough empathy and EQ to really get at that other person's perspective, that the other nuggets of gold that are in their brains and their experience in their minds that can be melded together with other nuggets of gold. To me, that creates a smart, fast cycles of learning organization that's built on trust, respect, and diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of contribution. So for me, that's what I hope to achieve, and I hope others would recognize it. And I think it's also being challenged as we bought 3 companies. And then how do you quickly, not slowly by hiring one person at a time, all of a sudden you're inheriting 20 engineers or 30 over here. How do you get that to follow up in line with a similar culture of trust, respect, and diversity? It's not easy, but it's been a great challenge and a great opportunity to do exactly that.
I wanted to end on that note with the culture side of things, because I know how important that is, just from the things that we've learned about Navitas and what we hope others can learn about as well. So, Gene, I just want to thank you for taking time out of your obviously very busy schedule, combined with coming up on a holiday week in the holiday season, fourth quarter, all that fun stuff, to spend some time with us and have this conversation.
Yeah, no, more than happy to do it, Jason. You've been a great supporter, a great partner to the company, and I love this chance to talk to you more about it and share some of our thoughts. So thanks for your time as well.
No, absolutely. Thanks so much.